Imagine standing in a world where every choice you make could mean life or death. The air is thick with fear, the Roman Empire's shadow looms over everything, and loyalty to your beliefs isn't just dangerous, it's deadly. Imagine being one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, ordinary men with families, dreams, and doubts suddenly thrust into an extraordinary mission. They didn't just follow a teacher, they followed a promise so powerful it led them to unimaginable sacrifice. Few people know exactly how these brave men met their tragic ends. Did you know that Peter, the leader of the apostles, is said to have been crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to die like Jesus? Or that Thomas, who doubted Jesus' resurrection, carried the message of hope all the way to India only to face death by spears? The apostles' lives and deaths weren't ordinary. They faced torture, exile, and execution, yet they never stopped spreading their message. The Bible records James's sword death, but fragmented traditions, mysterious legends, and accounts from ancient historians reveal the fates of the others. Some stories are crystal clear, while others leave us wondering what really happened. The apostles of Jesus were more than followers. They were the torchbearers of a message so revolutionary it upended empires. They forged their devotion in the crucible of persecution and sealed it with the ultimate price, their lives. Philip's story remains tangled in mystery and conflicting accounts. He dedicated his ministry to spreading the gospel in Asia Minor, especially in Phrygia, but how his life ended remains debated. Some traditions claim he was crucified, others say he was stoned, and a few suggest he endured both. Despite these variations, one fact stands clear: Philip's unwavering dedication to his mission. The scattered accounts reflect the volatile and dangerous environment in which he worked. Each step Philip took was a step towards spreading the word of Jesus, even as it brought him closer to martyrdom. Legend and possibility surround Simon the Zealot's death. Some stories suggest he was crucified, others say he was sawed in half, while another version claims he was burned alive. Yet there's also a tradition stating Simon lived to an old age and died naturally during Emperor Trajan's reign. While the exact details remain uncertain, Simon's role as a relentless missionary is undisputed. His fiery zeal for spreading the gospel made him a target, yet he pushed forward, knowing the dangers. His story reminds us of the thin line between triumph and tragedy in the apostles' lives. Matthew, once a despised tax collector, found redemption in Jesus and became a voice for the gospel. After years of ministry, he was believed to have been martyred in Ethiopia, likely by the sword. Other accounts suggest he died naturally, but the predominant tradition honors him as a martyr who paid the ultimate price for his faith. Matthew's transformation from a man of wealth to a man of sacrifice is profound. He left behind a life of comfort to embrace a path fraught with danger, proving that devotion isn't about where you start, but where you're willing to go. According to some accounts, Judas Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot met their deaths together in Mesopotamia, killed by a mob led by pagan priests. The scene, as described by tradition, is brutal. They were beaten with clubs and axes, a horrific end to lives spent spreading the gospel across the Roman Empire. The image of these two apostles standing firm together, even as the mob closed in, paints a vivid picture of their commitment. Their deaths were not in vain. They were acts of courage that inspired the early church to grow stronger. Matthias, chosen to replace Judas Iscariot, took on the mission of an apostle with full knowledge of its dangers. Traditions claim that he ministered in Ethiopia and the Caucasus region, where he either underwent crucifixion, beheaded, or peacefully passed away from old age. The variations in his story reflect the difficulty of tracing historical accounts from ancient traditions, but his dedication to the gospel is undisputed. Although not one of the original 12, Paul's story is inseparable from theirs. Chosen by the risen Christ, Paul became the apostle to the Gentiles, spreading the gospel with relentless passion. Paul met his demise in 67 AD amidst Nero's reign when he suffered beheading in Rome, a procedure exclusive to Roman citizens. Paul's second letter to Timothy captures the weight of his final days. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." 2 Timothy 4:7. His life and death stand as testaments to the power of transformation and unwavering devotion. Each of these apostles embraced a life of sacrifice, knowing the dangers but refusing to turn away. They walked into hostile territories, faced violent mobs, and endured gruesome ends, all for the sake of spreading a message they believed was worth everything. But their sacrifices weren't just for their time, they echo across history, challenging us to examine our own devotion. What would we sacrifice for what we believe in? Would we stand firm in the face of fear and persecution? Their stories compel us to reflect on our own convictions. The Roman Empire was at the height of its power during the apostles' lifetimes, stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Control, conformity, and the absolute authority of its rulers formed the foundation of this empire. Any movement that challenged the social or religious order was viewed as a threat. Christianity, with its teachings of one God, love, and equality, stood in stark contrast to the Roman religious system, which revolved around polytheism and emperor worship. This ideological conflict made the apostles' mission extremely dangerous. The apostles risked labeling themselves as rebels or state enemies by preaching the message of Christ. For the apostles, spreading the gospel wasn't just about faith. It was an act of defiance. The apostles' journey began in a Jewish society deeply rooted in tradition and governed by religious authorities. Many Jewish leaders rejected Jesus' claim to be the Messiah, viewing him as a blasphemer who disrupted their sacred laws. This resistance didn't stop with Jesus' crucifixion. It extended to his followers. Jewish authorities often persecuted the early Christians, as evidenced by the martyrdom of James, son of Zebedee, which Herod Agrippa I orchestrated. The Apostle Paul, who once persecuted Christians himself, provides insight into this tension. Before his conversion, Paul actively sought to suppress the growing Christian movement, showing the lengths to which opponents would go to silence them. Martyrdom wasn't simply an unfortunate consequence of the apostles' mission, it held deep theological meaning. In Greek, the word martyr means witness. For the apostles, their deaths weren't just sacrifices, but testimonies to their unwavering belief in Jesus' resurrection and divinity. The apostles' willingness to die for their faith fulfilled Jesus' teachings about the cost of discipleship. In the Gospels, Jesus told his followers, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Matthew 16:24. Their deaths symbolized the ultimate act of obedience and devotion, a vivid illustration of living and dying for their faith. The apostles' mission to spread the gospel brought them into direct conflict with both political authorities and local populations. Each region they entered posed unique challenges. For example, Asia Minor, Philip and Bartholomew faced violent opposition while preaching in these territories, which were steeped in pagan traditions. Rome, Peter and Paul's ministry brought them to the heart of the empire, where Nero's persecution of Christians was merciless. India, Thomas ventured into culturally distant lands, ultimately facing resistance that led to his death. These diverse locations illustrate the apostles' extraordinary courage. They willingly entered hostile environments, knowing they might not survive, because they believed the message they carried was worth any risk. Much of what we know about the apostles' lives and deaths comes from early Christian traditions. Church fathers and ancient writings, like Eusebius of Caesarea's Ecclesiastical History, preserved these accounts. However, these sources often blend historical fact with spiritual embellishment, creating a challenge for modern scholars. For instance, while many people accept Peter's upside-down crucifixion, the precise details of his execution only surfaced in writings decades after his death. Similarly, Bartholomew's gruesome martyrdom by flaying is rooted in tradition, but lacks definitive evidence. Despite these uncertainties, these stories convey the intensity of the apostles' sacrifices and their profound impact on the early church. The historical and theological context of the apostles' lives reveals more than their individual struggles. It demonstrates the resilience of the early Christian movement. Against the immense power of the Roman Empire and the opposition of religious authorities, the apostles stood firm. Their faith wasn't a fleeting belief, it was a force that reshaped the world. The Bible explicitly records the martyrdom of James, son of Zebedee, but it largely ignores the deaths of the other apostles. Instead, we rely on ancient writings and oral traditions passed down through generations. These sources often differ, sometimes dramatically. Take Philip, for example. Some traditions assert he was crucified, while others suggest he was stoned or even hanged. Another version claims he lived to old age and died peacefully. This lack of consistency raises questions. Were the differences due to regional storytelling? Did they attempt to adapt the apostles' stories to local cultures? Similarly, the fate of Bartholomew remains a subject of grim speculation. The most widely known account describes him being flayed alive, a horrific death that has become deeply symbolic in Christian art. However, other sources claim he was beheaded, whipped, or even crucified. Without a singular definitive narrative, these variations create a haunting sense of mystery. During the first few centuries of Christianity, most knowledge about the apostles was transmitted orally. This method of storytelling, while rich in cultural context, naturally led to embellishments over time. Exaggerated details may have inspired believers or emphasized the apostles' unwavering faith. For example, the story of Peter's upside-down crucifixion, widely accepted today, comes from writings by early church fathers like Origen, who lived long after Peter's death. While this account is considered credible, it is impossible to verify with absolute certainty. In other cases, the stories of the apostles merged with those of other historical figures, further obscuring the distinction between fact and fiction. Philip, for instance, is sometimes confused with Philip the Evangelist, leading to further confusion about their separate lives and ministries. Local audiences adapted the apostles' stories as Christianity spread across different regions. This process often resulted in multiple versions of their deaths. For instance, Thomas, who is believed to have traveled to India, is said to have been speared by Hindu priests in one account, while another claims he died during a conflict with local tribes. Similarly, Simon the Zealot and Judas Thaddeus are said to have been martyred together in Mesopotamia, beaten to death by mobs led by pagan priests. However, other traditions propose that Simon endured a crucifixion in Britain or even a burning alive in Persia. The variations reflect how different cultures wove the apostles' narratives into their own histories, creating a kaleidoscope of interpretations. The question of whether these stories serve as historical records or moral lessons arises from some of the more dramatic accounts. The gory details of Bartholomew's flaying, for instance, could serve as a vivid reminder of the apostles' dedication to their faith rather than a literal depiction of events. Similarly, the miraculous survival of John, who is said to have endured being boiled in oil without harm, might be symbolic of the enduring power of faith rather than a factual occurrence. John's later exile to the island of Patmos, where he wrote the Book of Revelation, adds to the mystique of his story, further blending historical events with theological meaning. While these inconsistencies might frustrate historians, they offer valuable insights into the early Christian world. Diverse communities adapted the apostles' stories to meet their spiritual needs, as evidenced by the differing accounts. They also underscore the challenges faced by early Christians in preserving their history amidst persecution and limited resources. Moreover, the variations reveal the apostles' universal appeal. Their sacrifices, whether crucified, stoned, or speared, inspired believers to persevere in their faith, regardless of the cost. The apostles lived during a time when proclaiming the gospel wasn't just risky, it was a near certain death sentence. They walked into hostile territories, faced rulers who saw their faith as rebellion, and endured persecution from their own communities. Yet they persevered. Why? They had faith in a force that surpasses both fear and suffering. Their sacrifices weren't just acts of devotion, they were catalysts for the growth of Christianity. Without their bravery, the gospel might never have reached the far corners of the world. Their stories of resilience and faith resonate deeply, even in today's world, where many still face persecution for their beliefs. Despite centuries of research, much of what we know about the apostles comes from a blend of historical records, oral traditions, and legends. While these sources offer glimpses into their fates, they also leave us with unanswered questions. Did Philip truly face crucifixion in Phrygia? Was Thomas really speared to death in India? Were Bartholomew's gruesome end and Peter's upside-down crucifixion historical realities or symbolic representations of their faith? These uncertainties are more than gaps in the narrative. They're reminders of the apostles' profound impact. Their stories have transcended time, evolving through countless retellings to inspire hope and perseverance in believers across generations. If you've found this exploration meaningful, consider supporting us through Super Thanks. By clicking that button, you're helping us continue creating content that dives deep into history, uncovers new perspectives, and keeps these important narratives alive. The apostles' lives hold timeless lessons. They instill in us the value of remaining steadfast in our beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. Their stories challenge us to examine our own beliefs and ask, what would we be willing to sacrifice for what we hold dear? But their stories also remind us of something deeper, that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about embracing the unknown, persevering in the face of uncertainty, and trusting in a purpose greater than ourselves. Let's remember that the apostles' legacy extends beyond ancient texts and archaeological finds as we conclude this exploration. Their courage and devotion echo through time, inspiring not only the early church, but countless believers who continue to carry their message of love, hope, and redemption. Their story is far from over. It lives on in every act of faith, every step taken to spread a message of peace, and every life transformed by the gospel. The apostles remind us that the power of belief can transcend time, challenge empires, and overcome even the greatest trials. The apostles walked paths of immense danger, yet they left footprints that still guide millions today. Their deaths weren't the end. They were the beginning of a movement that reshaped history. So, as we reflect on their sacrifices, let us ask ourselves, how will we carry their legacy forward? How will their courage inspire us to stand firm in our own convictions? Their faith, forged in the crucible of persecution, remains a beacon of light in a world often filled with darkness. And as we ponder their journey, may we find the strength to walk our own with the same devotion, courage, and unwavering hope that defined the lives of the 12 apostles. Thanks for watching. Join our community by subscribing to this channel. Until the next video.